Hi, everybody. David Nour back with you for another episode of the Sales Community's Tech Sales Insights Live with my co-host, Randy Seidel. Hello, Randy.
Hey, Nour. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks. Good to see you. And we have one of those esteemed colleagues of yours who went beyond kind of an operating role to on the governance side. Sue Barsamian is joining us. Hello, Sue.
Hey, Nour. How you doing? Hi, Randy.
Hey, I just gotta give her a plug. So worked together at HP, amazing exec. Has a great career before that, which we'll hear about. Went to Micro Focus, and then now she's really morphed into a I don't know if I'm allowed to say killer board member, but I know just kind of adding so much value to the boards, and has been a great friend. So can't thank you enough for sharing your time and your insights with us here for the next 50 odd minutes or so. And for those at home, this is actually episode 44. So Nour can't believe it. I guess we're aging here as we go. And for those that don't know, it's brought to you by Sales Community. So if you want to learn more and sell more, check us out at salescommunity.com.
Absolutely. So to echo that, Sue, thanks for being here. We're really excited about getting your insights on board dynamics that I think not only just senior sales executives, many of which are sales community members, the CROs, the CEOs, but also I think increasingly, others that just need to be aware of kind of that governance issues, governance manners. But before we go there, could you kindly give us a glimpse into a couple minutes in your background, where you've been, what you've done? Randy mentioned HP days.
Yeah.
Great to hear about your background.
Yeah. Well, as Randy said, we overlapped at HP. I'm officially a member of the Fans of Randy Club, which has been it's a great club to be in. But I spent over 35 years as an operating executive in largely enterprise software and SaaS and cybersecurity. The last decade, as Randy said, was at HP. I came to HP through the acquisition of Mercury. Mercury was about $1 billion software company. I was running go-to-market, and then spent much to my surprise, spent a decade at HP, which was actually a really great run. Ran the cybersecurity business there, which was about $1 billion portfolio. Was the chief sales and marketing officer for HP Software, which is about a $3.5 billion software business. And then, went off and started my next chapter about 3.5 years ago, which is my board director chapter, which has been great. And I am still focused on enterprise SaaS and cybersecurity in my board portfolio. And I've got a couple great public companies, including Box, NortonLifeLock, which I joined when it was Symantec, and Five9, which we just announced Zoom's intent to acquire Five9. And on the private side, I'm on Gainsight, which was recently acquired by Vista Equity, Xactly. And I had 2 board companies that were purchased last year. Segment was purchased by Twilio, and Auth0 was purchased by Okta. So lots of flux in my board portfolio that mirrors the flux and the excitement, I think, in the software industry and the SaaS industry right now.
So thank you for that. Let me ask you, because your journey is an interesting one. What was the impetus? What triggered you to want to go from an operating role, which you, Randy, and I discussed, very different. I'm on a couple of boards. I know Randy's active with boards, and National Association of Corporate Directors early on teaches us to nose in, fingers off, right?
Yeah.
We're not there to do. You're there to govern. You're there to provide that guardrail, if you will, for the management team. What made you want to transition from an operating role to more of that governance opportunity and role?
Well, I did it, Nour, after 37 years. So I think maybe fatigue. It was a great run. I loved every minute of it. But as I got to my last decade, I was increasingly in large customer-facing roles or running, large businesses. And, the name of the game is to be in front of the customer, which we all love. I mean, it's why we get up every day for the team and for the customers. But I would say pre-COVID, because that's when I stopped. Pre-COVID, being in those customer-facing roles meant you were traveling, 300,000 plus miles a year.
Yeah.
And at some point, you're just, you're ready to take a step back and have a little more flexibility in your life.
Randy, let me ask you, and then I'm going to go back to Sue. Randy, what are the biggest challenges you've seen when people that are in the trenches day in and day out transition to more advisory or board roles? What are some of the things? Give us 3 that you've seen, some of our friends struggle with when they try to go there. And then I'm going to come ask Sue how the roles have been different.
Yeah, well, I won't say friends. I'll say me. So as you said, going into the board roles, it's I guess kind of on the one hand, there's the supervisory kind of capacity. So it's kind of tied in with that. I'd say probably number 1, it's kind of giving feedback. Number 2, realizing that they don't necessarily have to do what you say. And then number 3, really just trying to have that more broader, I'll say almost like, if it's a public company, SEC oversight, that, ethics and integrity. And I know you want me to stick with 3, but do a 4th, it's really hiring the CEO is a primary job.
So Sue, let me ask you the same. So in head of sales and marketing globally and HP software, you're an operating role, you're in the trenches, you're doing it. What have you found to be the biggest differences when you did transition to more of a board role?
Yeah. Well, I spent 37 years as a doer, and I had to, you have to learn and unlearn. The head in, fingers out, NACD guidance is true. I don't think you intuitively get it in your first 6 months on a board. And so for me, I think I learned in the first year what that really meant, head in, fingers out. And thank God we all have board mentors. I joined, Box was my first board, Symantec was my second board, and I was lucky enough to serve on the board with some just excellent, experienced board directors who kind of told me, if and when I was getting too detailed. So that transparency was excellent for me. Now, I would say that doesn't mean that you can't be invited to go deeper. The first job of the board is to make sure you have the right CEO. And then if you believe you have the right CEO, you have to let the CEO do their job. But they can also invite you in based on your experience. And, at NortonLifeLock, or when it was Symantec, I went in on a 3-week project with another board member to go deep in some diagnostics of the company and the strategy. At Box, we formed an operating committee, which I chair, with the explicit charter of going deeper and helping the company to optimize both growth and profitability. So, but those are special invitations above and beyond kind of normal board role.
Randy, let's go to you. And I'm also really curious about the whole Box opportunity as our first position, but let's go to you first.
Sure. So it must be fantastic. Just thinking with in the board role, working with somebody like Vincent as the CEO at NortonLifeLock.
Yeah, it is great. We brought him in initially. So Vincent, for those of you who don't know who we're talking about, is Vincent Paulette. Randy and I worked with Vincent at HP Software. He then went off to EFI and Logitech, where he was a two-time public company CFO, and we brought him into NortonLifeLock, Symantec at the time, actually, as CFO. And through a series of steps, lo and behold, he's now CEO, and it's just been fabulous to work with him again.
So let's talk about this pandemic. Have your board responsibilities become more challenging because you haven't been able to travel and meet, in person? And you and I both know a lot of, we all know a lot of board members who, again, their age, their health could even put them at greater risk amidst this pandemic. Talk about the dynamics of board relationships and relationships with management when you can meet in person, and the fact that we've all had to live through these Hollywood squares the last 18 months.
Yeah. Look, I think it has surprised all of us, not only how these companies and these CEOs and these executive teams have navigated this. Quite frankly, I'm so impressed. And I'm so grateful to all of my board portfolio companies and the leadership that they've exhibited. And I think just the empathy that everybody has also had to exhibit through this pandemic. It was super intense at the beginning when everybody was, planning and replanning the replan. And, it was pretty constant, honestly made easier by the fact that we were all coming in virtually, because you would never have been able to get those cadences in the physical world. And I think it made us all realize this is pretty efficient. It doesn't mean that we'll stay virtual. I hope we don't stay virtual, but I hope it also means that, we won't go back to 100% physical. I think boards will see. I would expect them to steady state into some kind of a hybrid model, much like companies.
There's a lot of, I think, myths and misperceptions that a lot of executives have about joining boards. 3.5 years in, what have been some of the biggest misperceptions that, you figured out very quickly that's not the case at all? And I'll start. One of them is I show up 4 times a year. I collect a pretty nice paycheck, and I can just read the board material maybe on the flight to the board meeting. And then you show up and you're like, no, that's not actually how it works.
Yeah. Maybe there are some board members who do that. None of the ones I work with, that's for sure. Look, it's been nothing but a pleasant surprise. I did what I don't recommend people do, by the way. I did this totally sequentially. I did 37 years as an operator. I stopped and I started my board career. I tell people, don't do that, right? First of all, being a board director makes you a better operator. I can see that now 100%. So I tell people, don't wait. You should do a couple boards as you're an operator. I completely underestimated the degree to which I would continue to learn. And I am a continuous learner. I love to learn. I don't know. I kind of had this notion that after 37 years as an operator, I'd give back as my board career. And hopefully I am giving back, but I underestimated the intellectual stimulation and interest and the people and the ability to look at and pattern match across different companies, different patterns has just been fantastic.
Randy, let's go to you.
Yeah. So Sue, as you're, went through your operating roles and now all of a sudden kind of five plus board roles, it looks like, what advice would you have for those that are looking for board roles? Because you don't just kind of, raise your hand, all of a sudden they all come running. What would be kind of feedback or advice maybe to your younger self?
Yeah. So to be very intentional, some people, I talk, as you can imagine, and Randy, I know you do too. I talk to a lot of people who are thinking about building their board portfolio, and I mentor a lot of people who are doing that. And most people just don't know how to start. And I include myself in that club, right? Like, this is not a domain that most people understand, like the world of operating execs and, how to find another operating job. Everybody kind of understands that drill. Most people it's a real mystery as to what the board ecosystem looks like, and how you get introduced into it and how you play in it. And, my advice is to be very intentional. I talk to a lot of people in order to decide that I wanted my board focus to be enterprise SaaS, high growth, and cybersecurity. And that I had traveled for a decade extensively, and I wanted to stay largely Bay Area focused. And so once you narrow it in on a cohort, then you can start actually mapping companies that you're interested in, seeing who you know, talking obviously to headhunters and search firms who deal in the board ecosystem, but also just working, the network that everybody has through their operating careers. And, somehow those connections transition also to the board chapter as well.
So let's stay on that topic if we could. So Sue, you get introduced by one board member or a headhunter or somebody in your network to Randy, who's a CEO. You guys have a good visit. You're invited to meet other board members and potentially join Randy's board. And by the way, I often say I like private company boards better because that CEO actually wants your help and they're much more receptive, right? But talk about where do you start? How do you really embrace? How do you get your arms around kind of what's happening and where you can most effectively contribute? So talk about your thought process in joining a new board.
Yeah. Well, the good news is as you go through the process and, boards are made up of board members who have a variety of skill sets for specific reasons. If it's a public company, it includes, how do I staff the committees that we're required to have from a public company governance perspective with people who have those skills. But, for late stage private companies and public companies, it's like, hey, do I have somebody who can mentor the CEO? Do I have a sitting or former CFO? Do I have somebody who understands go-to-market? Do I have somebody who understands product strategy and how to build a product and a portfolio? And so you kind of know when you come in, what they're looking to you for, what skills you're expected to bring. And then, good boards have good onboarding programs. And, the first month on a new board is usually pretty intense because you get access to a lot of back material, but you also have one-on-ones with every single executive in the company. Even if you interviewed with those executives as part of the board interview cycle, you have another set of one-on-ones, which are really about, tell me what you're working on. Tell me what your priorities are. Tell me how the company is measuring you. Tell me what you're worried about, and tell me what you would like from the board and how it can help. And that onboarding process is really, really important. And you usually come out of it a heck of a lot smarter than when you went in.
Love it. So we've got a great question from Jesse that we'll ask. And as a reminder to our audience, we're live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. You're listening to, Sue Barsamian, a board of several boards, just incredible, both operating experience, but also more recently, boards of enterprise software, SaaS, and cybersecurity. So we encourage you to ask your questions and let's make sure we get those answered. But Randy, let's go to Jesse real quick.
All right, Jesse, thank you. Sue, the average CRO makes it under 18 months. It's probably 14 to 18 months if they're lucky. When do boards know it's time to find a new sales leader? And I'm going to add on, have you seen times where really the CEO should be the one that moves on and it's the CRO that gets shot?
I've seen all of it, Randy, and you and I both worked under Meg Whitman. I'm a big fan of Meg's phrase, right person, right place, right time, right attitude. And that I've used that time and time again as a board member. I've seen a lot of transitions of CROs and I've seen CEO transitions. It doesn't mean that the last person was bad. It means that that it's time to move on to a different skill set in many cases, or it could be that it's a person that has been there for a long time and is just fatigued. And so I think it's always good to have positive planned transitions if you can. It's usually pretty obvious when there's a need for a transition. I think Jesse's question was on the CRO side. Quite frankly, the data usually speaks for itself when you need a CRO transition. I think the one thing that you got to be careful of is sometimes the sales force is the victim of a portfolio that's not hitting, the mark in the market. And what you really need to do is to go fix a portfolio problem so that it's easier to sell, so that the sales team can be more successful. And so it's important not to shoot the wrong person.
Talk a little more about that. How do you delineate? And as Randy mentioned, sometimes the CRO gets shot because the data shows we're not hitting quarterly numbers, whatever. But it's more, it's a combination of product. It's a combination of retention, especially for SaaS companies. It's several contributing factors.
Yeah.
How do you ensure you're not shooting the wrong person?
So I'll use Box as an example. I've been on the Box board for 3.5 years, and we have gone through a product transition from being a single product company to being a cloud content management company. As the single product became less and less differentiated as major platform players, came into that space. But the platform, the multi-product portfolio, was highly differentiated. We had a great sales leader with Mark Wayland, and he was running what I call the race that never ends, right? He was improving sales hygiene. He was working on pipeline. He and Steph Carullo, who are our COO, brought in great talent. We're doing all the right things, and those things take time, but they were doing all the right things. And part of it was letting the Box portfolio catch up to the point that it was easier to sell because it became highly differentiated in the market. And we see that now. The Box portfolio has caught up overnight with the same sales team, right? The same sales leaders, the same sales team. Overnight, the metrics improve because they now have something in their bag that is more differentiated and thus easier to sell. And the numbers bear that out. So that's, I think, a really important example in my portfolio where I think we called the ball right and really supported Mark and Steph and what they were doing, while we really worked with Aaron and the product team as we were transitioning to that portfolio play.
Jesse, great question. Again, I want to encourage our audience to jump in with more board-centric questions for Sue. Randy, let's go to you.
Yeah, or anything on go-to-market, which Sue's fantastic at, or leadership, or any topics like that. So Sue, sometimes what I see is that there's these kind of board expectations that the CEO sets. So a lot of times before board meetings, I'll go and talk to the CRO and just say, hey, what's your line of sight to the number? What do you think? What's a product market fit? And then it's, sometimes it's awkward based on that CEO-CRO relationship, because the CEO just says, well, hey, we want to say these numbers. So it's kind of, how do you, peeling back the onion with the CRO, and then having that healthy board discussion saying, look, hey, we don't want to go after a plan that doesn't fit right, or that isn't fit right with the product market fit or the product or the solution set. Do you find that you're involved in some of those discussions?
Yeah, look, I think the best approach to board meetings is, especially for important topics where you may have questions, about the strategy or about go-to-market, is to dry run with a board member. I'm almost always the person that dry run go-to-market. I dry run go-to-market a lot. And it's both with the CRO, and then I have a conversation with the CEO. And the idea is, let's hash out things before the board meeting, and let's then have as productive a board meeting as we can. And, I guess the good news is when you build your board portfolio from scratch, you have the luxury of, boards obviously choose their board members choose their boards. And so I only join boards where the culture and the CEO is a culture of transparency and openness, and don't play games. And so I just, the good news is I don't have any of that in my portfolio, but that was not an accident. You look at the executive team and specifically the CEO for the way they operate, and Aaron Levy, Nick Mehta, Chris Cabrera, Vincent Paulette, Rowan Trollope. I mean, these CEOs are just fantastic, transparent, communicative, and we tend to have really productive board meetings.
Randy, we've got a fantastic question from someone that's very familiar to both our community and maybe your household.
Shannon.
Shannon.
Given it has to be mutual fit, what characteristics do you look for in a company when joining a board?
Hi, Shannon. Great question. So I talked a little bit about it just now, but look, I look in many cases for the same things that I look for when I was an operating executive and looked at companies, which is I want to be in a large and growing market category. I want to be with a company that has differentiated and also what I think is sustainable value proposition and position, in that category. And then I want to look at a CEO and a board that can execute against that opportunity. And, ultimately, the CEO is critical, but the board is responsible for keeping or not the CEO. So, you want to look upstream at the board, you want to look at the CEO, and, not everything else in the company has to be perfect, as long as you believe that you've got a board and a CEO that can make the right decisions.
Shannon, thank you for that. And again, feel free to others jump in as well. Let's go to Randy. Let's go to Eric. Another great question.
All right, Eric, thank you. Hi, Sue. Can you describe what operator traits boards are looking for, and at what level is the ideal operator when making a move to board work?
Hey, Eric. Great to see you in chat. So I talked about this a little bit earlier. There are a couple typical operator profiles for boards. It's always inclusive of a sitting or former CEO, a sitting or former CFO, and then usually a go-to-market executive, a product and strategy executive, and then sometimes, we just added a privacy lawyer on the NortonLifeLock board. We added a chief information security officer. If it's a tech board, it's often that you'll have a former CIO on the board, and that will vary board by board. You're usually ready to entertain a board as an operating executive when you're in the C-suite and therefore have board experience, have experience with your board, right? You have presented to boards, you've sat in on board meetings, and that usually happens when you're kind of CIO minus or CEO -1. And that's a good time to start entertaining boards.
Should I be concerned that you didn't mention, very brilliant advisors, authors, educators? Should I be a little concerned about that profile that got left out? I mean,
we'll work on that. We'll get that profile added.
Right, Randy, over to you.
Yeah, so just thinking with somebody with Eric's profile, we have a lot of people watching that are more kind of VP of sales types, RVPs, maybe directors, that role. So certainly most of the time it would be next to impossible to go into a proper board role. But do you see some companies looking at people kind of doing that, kind of advisory board or kind of like a junior board type work where they can come in and help, where there's kind of some synergy and complementary efforts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. First of all, just to clarify, CRO is a highly desirable board profile, right? It's in that category of go-to-market executive. There are a lot of CROs on public and private boards these days. It's a really hot profile. If you're not yet at that C-suite level, then the advisory role is a great place to plug in, or also plugging in earlier stage companies, right? Companies that are Series A, Series B, Series C. You're helping out. You can do that very effectively at the level you are. And sometimes by getting in early and working successfully with the company, it will transition into a formal board role later.
And that's the comment I was going to add is, again, one of those misperception is I stopped being an operator, at least that's sequential. And then all these board invitations are going to come my way. And it's like, okay, reality is, it was a very expensive real estate. and you brought up
Yeah.
board experience, starting with even nonprofits or your, civic or community gives you
Yeah.
that experience to then build on.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
earlier, Series A, Series B, it is very much relationship centric, and those early ones are going to give you the stair steps to more visible, higher profile type opportunities.
Yeah.
So that's a great one. Let's go back to Jesse. We got another question from Jesse.
All right. Thanks, Jesse. SaaS depends on sales and marketing being aligned. Do you think you can have a CMO reporting outside of the CRO?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the CMO reporting outside of the CRO is more the norm, quite frankly. But I've seen it both ways. I've run it both ways. I think it really comes down to the individuals and whether you have somebody in a chief customer officer or president of field ops role who has been a former CRO and a former CMO. That can work quite well. You've got examples of that with people like Jerry Elliott at Cisco. She's done both extensively, and that model works great. I don't have a prejudgment on the right formula there. I think it's very situational. The one thing I would say is sales and marketing alignment is critical, which is one of the reasons why this category or this function of revenue ops, has really increased over the last couple of years, where you've got an ops team that is looking across marketing ops, sales ops, and customer success ops, and really instrumenting, data analytics, performance optimization across the whole, across the end-to-end spectrum of the customer's journey. That is, in my mind, critical, regardless of the reporting structure of your CRO and CMO.
Randy, let's go to you.
Yeah. So, Sue, I think when we're talking yesterday, we were talking about just the evolving of sales tools. So take 10 years ago, you had kind of LinkedIn and kind of Salesforce were the tools, and then now there's kind of hundreds or thousands. What are some of your observations there? How that space has really moved so fast?
Yeah, at some level, I'd love to be reincarnated and start all over again, because it's amazing. It's just amazing the tools that are available today, and I think that the healthy culture of transparency as a result, and some people, you could think of it as of inspection, but it's inspection with an eye towards coaching, right? The fact that your sales conversations are going to be listened to by something like Gong or Chorus, and it's going to be turned into a coaching conversation, and not only help around what you said, but help around identifying, using artificial intelligence, red flags that they identified in what the customer said that will help you to chart your next step in the sales cycle. I mean, there's so much available. There's so much insight and data available. I mean, gosh, when we used to take over a territory, we had to go meet everybody in the former tribe that had that territory and just take a ton of notes. It's just things have moved on so much since then.
Yeah, and then especially if you take a look at customer success, which now kind of is starting to fall under the CRO realm. So with Gainsight, you probably have a lot of great insights there as well.
Yeah, Gainsight is it's one of the reasons that I joined the board. I was a Gainsight customer. I bought Gainsight both at HP and at Micro Focus because this end-to-end focus on the customer journey and being able to, and the good news is, Gainsight catalyzed the category when the world moved from on-prem software to SaaS. And the good news is, in the world of SaaS, you can see how your customers are engaging with your product, and you can see whether they're you've got shelfware in the old language, right? Or whether they're actually using what they've purchased. And so, this category of customer success and being able to look at how your customers are engaging with your product, how your customers are engaging with you, how's your executive sponsor responding, having quarterly business reviews with the customer using real data about what's working and what's not working for them and whether they're getting the outcomes that they signed up for is just such a step forward in terms of really delivering customer outcomes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Sue, we've got several other great questions that are coming up that we'll jump into but I want to talk about priorities. Can you comment on the top, 3-5 priorities of the various boards you're on? What's taking up the preponderance of the mind share of the board?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the good news is I think COVID is still on the list. However, it's not with the intensity that it was a year ago when everybody was trying to figure out, what it meant to kind of the fundamentals of the business. And now, as Aaron Levy says, the return to work strategy is the most edited PowerPoint in the history of PowerPoint, right? Everybody's trying to now figure out how do we go back? When do we go back? But priorities are obviously growth in a fast moving. I'm going to speak from the perspective of tech and specifically enterprise SaaS because that's where I play. And if at the public company level, one priority is obviously delivering increasing shareholder value, and the biggest correlators to shareholder value and multiples in the public SaaS space are growth and net retention. Hence the conversation about Gainsight and the focus on customer success and net retention as a feeder to growth. We spend an enormous amount of time on all my boards on retention and growth. Operational rigor, I put that in the category of the race that never ends. You've got to do it profitably. You've got to continuously improve. But now I think it's really great. Boards are paying a lot more attention to the category of ESG. It means a lot of things to a lot of people, but how are we great companies to our shareholders, our customers, our employees, and to the world, right? People are paying more attention to climate change and how are we responsible global citizens? And I love that as a board focus.
So Shannon has got a great question, which lends itself really nicely to also that diversity,
Yeah.
and the thing Jesse's brought up as well, inclusion, equity, belonging. So present company excluded, the tech industry for a very long time has been dominated by white male, right? And those men are now in the fall, if not winter of their careers, which makes them obviously very viable board members. Going to Shannon's question, what advice do you have for women in sales and key takeaways from your own career that not just helps you succeed as an operator, but really also makes you a very attractive, maybe a less represented community board member for some of these tech companies?
Yeah. Well, the good news is it has focus, Shannon. And, I talked about the focus on ESG, a huge part of ESG, as Nour said, is diversity and inclusion. And I spent a lot of time on diversity and inclusion. It is a topic at the board level in every single company. And it's at two levels. It's first of all, diverse boards, right? Because if boards are essentially helping to govern the company, you want to make sure that you've got diversity on the boards. And, I'm fortunate in that my boards are California-based companies. California took a big step a couple of years ago with some diversity, but you probably saw 2 weeks ago, Adina, the CEO at NASDAQ, the NASDAQ proposal got approved. NASDAQ listed companies will also need to be diverse. And that has moved the needle. Boards are significantly more diverse than they were 3 to 4 years ago. And that is improving every year. But the good news is that is also fostered, and the whole ESG movement has fostered transparency about diversity within the company and commitment to accountability to change the dynamics, whether that's pay equality, whether that's representation at the leadership level or representation at the broad company level. We look at all of it. Many companies publish that at the public company level as part of their corporate social responsibility, their ESG reports. And I think those are all good dynamics, because as the old saying goes, you can't manage what you don't measure, and measuring it and reporting on it is really the first step.
And Sue, I'm a big believer of beyond ethnic and gender diversity that the three of us hear a lot about. There's also enormous value in cognitive diversity, right? So really assessing that board for how do we embrace others that think potentially very differently than we do goes a long way. So Randy, we've got a great question from Sean.
All right, Sean, good to hear you. See ya. Other than regularly scheduled board meetings, please comment on best practices of additional touch points, comms, et cetera, between the CEO and the boards.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan, Sean, of at a minimum a strategy day, and that's usually if boards are on a quarterly board meeting cadence, then you've got 4 board meetings a year, plus committee meetings, obviously, and specially scheduled board meetings if you end up in an M&A transaction or something, a little bit additional. But a 5th meeting around a strategy day, and I like those personally, I like those to be strategy retreats, where everybody comes together. You don't do them at the company. You go away from distractions and you spend a whole day, sometimes a day and a half, focused on the market, an update on the competitive landscape, kind of a data-driven perspective on where you are and maybe where you aren't, and then a real commitment to what you're going to focus on for the next year. That usually makes the rest of the year's board meetings go much smoother when you're sure as you come into the year that you've got the board interlocked around strategy. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a fan of individual board members peeling off for back channels as invited to do so with individual executives. The CFO profile on the board usually does a one-on-one with the CFO or 2. I almost always, in between board members, have a one-on-one with the CRO and the CMO. And that's really helpful to just, listen, get input, and also maybe help flush some things out in between board meetings.
That's fantastic. Love that. And I love, again, CEOs and leadership teams who want your help. And Sue, as you mentioned, when they invite you in, that's incredibly refreshing, because they're raising their hands and saying, I may not know how to do that, or at least I can do some counsel. So for the record, in case Randy Seidel is thinking, I did not offer to compensate Mike Smith for his kind comment and question here, but Randy, one of my fans, member of my fan club, is here.
Okay. Oh, we got to give Mike a big shout out. Sue, I'm a big fan of Dave Nour and his books. In relationship economics, he talks about relationships that have impact on careers more than others. Who is that for you?
Well, Randy, you and I were just talking about one of my significant mentors in my career, which is Tom Hogan. I worked for Tom at HP. He was the guy who kind of kicked me in the pants when I was going after my first SVP role at HP. And, I think at one point he told me, this role's not going to land on your head. If you want it, you need to go for it. And I did, and I got it. And it was pivotal for me. And he was really instrumental for me. I continue to be friends with him and work with him today. We're actually lucky enough to be on the Gainsight board together right now. So I'm kind of back in Tom's orbit. Bethany Mayer, who, Randy, Bethany Mayer, who I worked with at HP, and she's the chairman of the board at Box, has been a great colleague and mentor for me through my career. So And obviously at HP, we were surrounded by people like Meg Whitman, Ann Livermore. I was lucky to have some great female leaders in my orbit, but also a lot of great male leaders like Tom.
Yeah, he was great. I can remember going in as a brand new exec. I mean, he was, so kind in terms of embracing me, and he had those, cross sales exec, kind of offsites and everything else, but real great leader.
So Mike, thank you. Mike, thank you for that question. Randy, let me go ask you one and then give Sue a chance to think about this. Randy, when is the right time to leave a board position? Is there something that, or set of triggers or things that come up as, you know what, I may not be a viable fit for this, or it's time to kind of move on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, in the case of acquisition, and I think Sue has one or two in the works. I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it or not. In that case, obviously, it's the acquiring company who then has a call on if you're going to stay or go. So that's kind of less out of your control. You have other times where maybe it's just, tough and brutal. You want to leave, you can't for a whole bunch of obvious reasons. And then, maybe something, I've not had any other situations where I've, decided to, opt out. Maybe there's just not, mutual interest, or you want to have a change of scenery. The, company wants to have a change of scenery. Sue, what's your perspective?
Well, I'm only 3.5 years in, so I haven't aged out of any positions yet. Sometimes
How could you at 28?
At 28, you're right. Thank you, Nour. I knew I liked you. Look, there's usually an age limit, a tenure limit. But I guess I would say a couple of things. You are making a commitment when you join a board, and let's go back to right person, right place, right time, right attitude. At some point, even if you've only been on the board for, let's say, 3 to 5 years, based on the dynamics in the company, you and the board, may decide you're no longer the ideal fit for that board, and that can be a positive transition. It doesn't have to be a negative transition. But other than that, boards, I mean, it's not like an operating job where on any given day, you can just up and quit. A board, it's a more serious decision to join a board than it is to take an operating job, because, if the going gets rough, unless there's some malfeasance or something there that is really something that you can't tolerate, you're the board. You're committed to the company, and you're committing to help the company navigate through even choppy waters. And you have to be ready to sign up for that when you sign up for a board.
Randy, let's go to you.
Yeah, so you're talking about the board offsite before, and it struck me talking about strategy. So maybe for both of you. So Nour, you've got your strategy visualization. Maybe it's virtual in this day and age of COVID, but the visualization exercise, which might be interesting to have you talk a little bit about, and then maybe Sue can also segue to say kind of how do they really tackle strategy.
So thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, so I'm blessed. I think rest of this year I've got at least a handful of senior leadership and board retreats, exactly as Sue mentioned, scheduled. And one of the things we do is we bring my creative director, Lynn Wilson, who really takes the great discussions during that day, typically day and a half, and we visualize them. So what we do is we capture a visual representation of those key priorities, of the vision, the direction, the path, what we're going to focus on, what we're not going to get distracted by. And then we share that with the board members, and we share that internally with the senior leadership team. And Randy, it's incredibly valuable to have everybody on the same page visually. And it's not a 30-page PowerPoint. It's one page. And if we can't get that strategy and vision on that page and make it succinct, it's not going to be remembered. It's not going to be repeated. So we found a lot of success in doing that. Sue, what do you, to echo Randy's question, what's the biggest takeaway from those retreats, and what have you found to be the biggest value from them?
Yeah. Well, I love the visual approach, Nour. So I'm a big fan of having a strategic framework that the company and the board aligns around. At HP, we used Lafley's Playing to Win, which came out of the P&G, experience. Most of my boards in the SaaS space use 7 powers. It's kind of like sales methodologies, just kind of pick one, but have a framework. And I'll use the example of Segment and Peter Reinhardt. As we were going into our strategy session, Peter sent the board member a primer on 7 powers so that we were all speaking the same language as we talked about strategy. And specifically, 7 powers is really big on your moat, right? Your moat, which is your differentiation. And there are 7 things that can define a moat. And you need to know as you're finalizing your strategy and evolving your strategy, whether you are hardening and fortifying your moat or not. And don't kid yourself about doing things that at the end of the day might be interesting, but aren't actually, deepening your moat. And it was super helpful. And it's helpful for me because most of my boards do use 7 powers. And it's really an aligned way. And then you can feed the conclusions into the 1-page visual, but you do it within the context of a strategic framework for how you think about strategy.
Love it. For our audience, if you joined us late, you've missed a whole lot of nuggets. I'm convinced Sue is one of those executives, one of those leaders who forgets more in 5 minutes than many of us will learn throughout our career. So you've been listening to Sue Barsamian, board member, several great enterprise SaaS, cybersecurity type companies. Sue, for our final question, I'm going to ask you either for a great story about Randy Seidel. We always like to give him grief in this session. Or you have the option. You can choose what you've missed most during the pandemic and what are you looking forward to most on the other side of it. Up to you.
I'm going to go with Randy for 2, Nour. So look, Randy is a legend, and he's just one of those bigger than life people. And of course, in any situation, it's always going to be about Boston College, the Patriots. We know all of that about Randy. But one of my favorite Randy stories is seeing him in action at a very large sales kickoff in Las Vegas. Randy, I think you were running Americas at the time, and Randy started a philanthropic commitment within the team. And I saw Randy rally. I don't know, Randy, there must have been 2,000 people in that room. And Randy was raising money for a local Las Vegas school district. And kind of to our surprise, had the president of the school district actually poised to come up on stage. But the amount of money he raised versus what we thought we were going to raise was, and like Randy just running up and down the aisles, like passing the hat, I say beating people into, donations, but people were so thrilled because Randy was so committed and passionate. And I just, Randy is one of those rare people who just has it all. And I love his commitment to people, and I love his commitment to giving back. And that's my best Randy story.
I love it. And
do you remember that, Randy?
Thank you. Yep, very well. Thank you. We had, I think, 125 grand of cash and all kinds of bags. And that was a problem because they couldn't take cash. So we had to figure that out. And then we got a match from HP for additional equipment. Yeah.
And this woman was like, she was speechless.
Yeah, it was basically school for, of course, I can't remember the name, but it was basically catered to the homeless in Las Vegas, which you wouldn't think there'd be homeless. And then so anyway, it was a great experience and really helped captivate, I think, the legacy of HP. But
having known him, having coached him, it is a perfect example of who he is and what he's about and the commitment he brings, I think, to everything he does. So on that note, now that we've put you on this ridiculous pedestal, how about you wrapping us up and bringing us home, Randy Seidel?
Sure. As Monty Python said, I'm not worthy. But anyway, yeah, definitely appreciate, Sue, thanks so much. Fantastic. Exceeded my very high expectations. And Nour, as always, thank you. I forgot to mention my book. Sue's kind enough to give a testimonial in it. So thank you very much for that. You can Amazon's a little sketchy with inventory and stuff, but you can go to salescommunity.com/book. You can definitely check out Sales Community if you want to learn more, sell more, network. A lot of the sales and marketing tech firms are getting involved, sponsorships and other things, which is fantastic. And next week we have for episode 45, Mark Thurman, who's Chief Operating Officer at Tenable. And I know he'll be fantastic as well. So again, Sue, can't thank you enough. Thanks for your friendship, kind words, great insights, and Nour likewise. Thanks.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, everybody. Have a
Thanks,
great
guys.
week. We'll see you next week around the same time. Take care.